The unexpected inheritance. Daniel was a struggling university student, barely scraping by on odd jobs and student loans. He had big dreams but no means to achieve them. That was until he met Eleanor Sinclair, a 71-year-old millionaire widow, known for her sharp wit and vast fortune. Their relationship started unconventionally. Daniel was hired as her personal assistant, running errands and keeping her company. But as days turned into months, Eleanor found his youthful optimism refreshing, and Daniel admired her wisdom. Then, out of the blue, she proposed marriage. At first, Daniel thought it was a joke. "I have my reasons," Eleanor said cryptically. "Marry me, and you'll never have to worry about money again." Desperate to escape his financial struggles, he agreed. The wedding was quiet, with only a few witnesses. Daniel moved into Eleanor's grand estate, enjoying a life of luxury. But exactly 7 days after their wedding, everything changed. One evening, Eleanor handed him an envelope and smiled. "Open it," she said. Inside was a legal document, a contract stating that everything she owned, every penny of her wealth, would be donated to charity upon her death. Daniel wouldn't inherit a cent. He stared at her in shock. "Why did you marry me then?" Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "I wanted to see if you loved me, or my money." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had entered the marriage for financial security, but in just 7 days, he realized something unexpected. He had grown to care for Eleanor. It was never about the money. The question was, would he stay? The unexpected inheritance. Daniel Carter had always dreamed of a better life. A life without the weight of unpaid bills, sleepless nights worrying about rent, and the constant hunger gnawing at his stomach. As a struggling university student, he juggled part-time jobs while trying to keep his grades up. His classmates drove flashy cars and wore designer clothes, but he barely had enough for bus fare. Then he met Eleanor Sinclair. She was nothing like the frail old women he had seen on the streets of the city. Despite being 71 years old, Eleanor carried herself with an air of confidence and elegance that turned heads wherever she went. She had been a business tycoon in her younger years, building an empire from the ground up, and even in retirement, she was still sharp, witty, and commanding. Daniel met her by pure chance at a bookstore. She struggled to reach a book on the top shelf, and he, being tall and polite, grabbed it for her. She had smiled, thanked him, and struck up a conversation. To his surprise, she invited him for coffee. He hesitated but accepted. Over coffee, they talked about life, ambitions, and dreams. She listened intently to his struggles, his aspirations of becoming a writer, and his desire to escape poverty. Days later, she invited him to be her personal assistant, a well-paying job that required only companionship, helping her with errands, and keeping her company. Daniel accepted. The proposal to overtime, their bond deepened. Eleanor went like anyone he had ever met, intelligent, kind, and full of wisdom. She shared stories of her youth, the battles she had fought, the empire she had built and lost, and the loneliness that came with wealth. Then, one evening, Eleanor did something unexpected. "Daniel," she said over dinner, swirling a glass of red wine, "I want you to marry me." Daniel choked on his drink. "Marry you?" Eleanor smirked. "Yes." He blinked, trying to process the words. "Are you joking? I'm completely serious," she said. "You need financial security, and I need companionship. Someone I can trust. Marry me, and you'll never have to worry about money again." Daniel was stunned. He wasn't in love with Eleanor, but the offer was tempting. A life free from struggle, free from debt. It was everything he had ever wanted. After a night of contemplation, he made his decision. The marriage. The wedding was a quiet affair. No grand ceremony, no media attention, just a simple courthouse wedding with a few witnesses. Daniel moved into Eleanor's grand mansion, where luxury surrounded him at every turn. For the first time in his life, he wore tailored suits, dined on gourmet meals, and slept in a bed larger than his entire apartment. But something strange happened. Eleanor never spoke about his inheritance. There were no discussions about wills, assets, or bank accounts. She never once mentioned how much of her fortune he would receive. Daniel brushed it off, assuming she would bring it up in time. Then, on the seventh day of their marriage, everything changed. The truth revealed. That evening, Eleanor called him into her study. She sat by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, and handed him an envelope. "Open it," she said with a mysterious smile. Daniel's hands trembled as he tore it open. Inside, he found a legal document, but instead of a will leaving him her fortune, it was a contract. The contract stated that upon Eleanor, he stammered, "Why?" Eleanor leaned forward, her piercing blue eyes locking onto his. "I wanted to see if you loved me, or my money." Silence filled the room. Daniel's chest tightened. He had entered this marriage for financial security, believing he had won the ultimate prize. But in those 7 days, something unexpected had happened. He hadn't grown to care for Eleanor, her laughter, her stories, her presence. He realized that it was never about the money. He looked at her, his heart pounding. "So, what now?" Eleanor studied him for a moment, then smiled. "That depends on you, Daniel. Are you staying?" Daniel swallowed hard. He had a choice to make, and for the first time in his life, money was no longer the most important thing. The unexpected inheritance. Daniel Carter had spent most of his 24 years fighting against the odds. Growing up in poverty, he knew hunger, struggle, and the crushing weight of dreams that felt just out of reach. He was brilliant, hardworking, and ambitious. But the world didn't care about potential when rent was due and stomachs were empty. University was supposed to be his escape, but instead, it became another battlefield. Between juggling classes, part-time jobs, and a growing pile of debt, Daniel felt like he was drowning. His classmates spoke of summer vacations in Paris, designer watches, and stock investments. Daniel counted his coins before deciding whether to buy coffee. That's when he met Eleanor Sinclair. She was nothing like the frail, elderly women he had helped across the street in his childhood. Eleanor was a bold, confident, and captivating, despite her 71 years. She dressed in designer silk, her silver hair always elegantly styled, and she had a presence that demanded attention. Daniel first saw her in a bookstore, struggling to reach a hardbound edition of The Great Gatsby from a high shelf. Instinctively, he grabbed it for her. "Chivalry isn't dead after all," she had mused with a wry smile. That simple act led to coffee. Then more conversations. Eleanor was sharp-witted, cultured, and surprisingly warm. Over the next few weeks, she invited Daniel into her world, hiring him as her personal assistant. The pay was exceptional, far beyond what any struggling student could dream of. The job? Simple. He ran errands, organized books, helped with technology, and most importantly, kept her company. It was the easiest job Daniel had ever had, until Eleanor did something he never expected. The proposal. One evening over dinner in her grand estate, Eleanor swirled her glass of wine thoughtfully before saying, "Daniel, marry me." He nearly choked on his food. What?" Eleanor smirked. "I said marry me." Daniel stared at her, dumbfounded. "I'm serious," she continued. "You need financial stability. I need companionship. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." Daniel's mind raced. This was insane. She owed enough to be his grandmother, and yet, the offer was tempting. Eleanor Sinclair was worth hundreds of millions. Marrying her meant a life without struggle, without sleepless nights worrying about money. It meant luxury, freedom, and a future without financial chains. After a night of thinking, he said yes. The marriage. Their wedding was simple, almost quiet, held in a courthouse with only a few witnesses. There was no media coverage, no grand reception, just a must-sign document that made them husband and wife. Daniel moved into her estate, a mansion that felt more like a palace, with chandeliers, marble floors, and artwork worth more than his entire tuition. He had a personal chef, designer suits, and cars that most people only saw in movies. For the first time in his life, he wasn't worried, but something was off. Eleanor never mentioned his inheritance. She never spoke of what would happen to her wealth after she was gone. She treated him well, laughed with him, and even enjoyed their conversations late into the night. But money? Not a word. Daniel assumed it was only a matter of time. Then, on the seventh day of their marriage, everything changed. The revelation. That evening, Eleanor summoned Daniel to her study. The room smelled of aged books and whiskey, the fireplace casting flickering shadows along the walls. She handed him a thick envelope. "Open it," she said, watching him closely. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he tore it open, expecting to see legal documents transferring her wealth to him. Instead, what he found made his breath hitch. It was a contract, stating that upon Eleanor's death, every single penny of her fortune would be donated to charity. Daniel would receive nothing. The world felt like it was tilting. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. I don't understand." Eleanor leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to see if you loved me, or my money." Silence hung between them like a loaded gun. Daniel's stomach twisted. He had entered this marriage for financial security, believing he had, money. Daniel looked at Eleanor, his pulse hammering. He had a choice to make. Stay, for reasons he never anticipated. Or walk away, empty-handed but free. Eleanor raised a brow. "So, Daniel, what will it be?" Daniel took a deep breath. And for the first time in his life, money wasn't the most important thing. The Unexpected Inheritance, extended version. A life of struggle. Daniel Carter knew struggle intimately. He had grown up in a world where hard work didn't always lead to success, where people toiled endlessly only to barely make ends meet. His parents had done their best, but financial hardship had been an ever-present shadow in their lives. Determined to break free from the cycle of poverty, Daniel threw himself into his studies, earning a place at a prestigious university. But once there, he found himself surrounded by wealth and privilege. His classmates came from families who owned businesses, vacationed in Europe, and discussed investments at casual brunches. Meanwhile, Daniel counted every penny, worked late shifts, and lived in a cramped apartment where the heater barely worked in winter. He was drowning in student debt, exhausted, and desperate for a way out. That was when he met Eleanor Sinclair. An unlikely friendship. Their meeting was pure chance. Daniel had stopped by a quiet bookstore after class, seeking solace in the scent of old paper and ink. He noticed an elderly woman struggling to reach a book on the top shelf and instinctively helped her. "Ah," she said, taking the book from his hands. "The Great Gatsby." A tragic tale of wealth and longing. Daniel smiled. "One of my favorites." Eleanor's keen eyes studied him. "You love stories, don't you?" "I do." She invited him for coffee. Surprised but intrigued, he agreed. That afternoon, over rich espresso in a quiet cafe, they talked. Eleanor was unlike anyone he had ever met. Witty, sharp, and brimming with life despite her age. She was 71 years old. But there was a fire in her that younger people lacked. She told him about her life, her successes, and her regrets. He, in turn, told her about his struggles, his dreams, and his fear of never escaping poverty. She listened, and then she made him an offer. "Come work for me," she said. "Be my assistant." The pay was generous, far beyond what any struggling student could hope for. The job was simple: errands, helping her with technology, and keeping her company. It seemed like a dream. And so, Daniel accepted. The proposal. Weeks passed, and Daniel became a fixture in Eleanor's life. He accompanied her to art galleries, helped her organize her extensive library, and listened to her reminisce about her youth. Then, one evening over dinner, she shocked him with a proposal. Marry me. Daniel nearly dropped his fork. What? Eleanor smirked. You heard me. He stared at her. Are you joking? Not at all, she said calmly. You need security. I need companionship. It's a simple arrangement. Daniel's heart pounded. Marrying Eleanor would mean a life of unimaginable luxury. No more worries about rent, student loans, or working late nights just to survive. He would live in her mansion, drive luxury cars, and travel the world. And when she eventually passed, he would inherit everything. It was a life-changing opportunity. And so, after a long night of contemplation, Daniel said yes, the wedding and the mansion. Their wedding was quiet, almost secretive. No media attention, no grand receptions. Just a few witnesses, a legal document, and suddenly, Daniel Carter was now Daniel Sinclair. He moved into her grand estate, a sprawling mansion with chandeliers, marble floors, and gardens that stretched for acres. Every morning, he woke up in a room larger than his entire old apartment. He wore custom-tailored suits, ate meals prepared by world-class chefs, and walked through hallways lined with priceless artwork. It was the life he had always dreamed of. But something fell off. Eleanor never spoke about his inheritance. She never mentioned how much he would get or when. She carried on as if nothing had changed, treating him like a dear friend, laughing over breakfast, and teasing him about his reading habits. Daniel waited, thinking the topic would come up eventually. Then, exactly 7 days after their marriage, everything changed. The envelope. That evening, Eleanor summoned Daniel to her study. The fire crackled in the grand fireplace, casting golden light across the room. She poured herself a glass of whiskey and gestured for him to sit. Then she handed him an envelope. Open it, she said, her expression unreadable. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he tore it open, expecting legal documents, transferring her wealth to him. Instead, his breath caught as he read the words inside. It was a dirty contract. A contract stating that, upon Eleanor's death, every single penny of her fortune would be donated to charity. Daniel would receive nothing. His heart pounded. I don't understand, he stammered. But over the past 7 days, something unexpected had happened. He had come to care for Eleanor. Her laughter, her stories, the way she challenged his thoughts. He had begun to admire her, to enjoy their time together. For the first time, money wasn't the most important thing in his life. Eleanor studied his reaction. So, Daniel, she said, tilting her head, are you staying? The choice. Daniel stared at the contract. The old version of him would have walked away, furious that his dreams of wealth had been snatched from him. But the man he was becoming? The man who had shared deep conversations with Eleanor, who had grown to respect her, to cherish her company. He swallowed hard. Then, for the first time in his life, money didn't matter. He folded the paper and placed it on the table. Then he met Eleanor's gaze and said, I never planned to stay, but now I don't want to leave. A slow smile spread across Eleanor's face. She took a sip of her whiskey, her eyes gleaming with something almost like pride. Good answer. And in that moment, Daniel knew. His life had changed forever.